Will Haskell is a two-term state senator. He's just written a book. He's also 25 years old. So welcome to 06880, the podcast. He's a Staples High School graduate and been profiled in the New York Times and Time magazine. He's been interviewed on radio and TV. I think the only thing he hasn't done is run for president, and that's because he still has 10 years to go before he's old enough. So, Will, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I'm thrilled to be a part of this podcast.
That's fun. It's fun. I guess the first question is, can I call you Will?
Please.
It's not Mr. Senator?
Hardly. So long as I can call you Dan. I remember popping into your office in high school, so it feels like we've come a long way since then.
We've come quite a ways, and I will not even mention that I went to school with your father. But do people, sort of look past you or discount you or maybe even patronize you because of your age?
It was certainly a challenge on the campaign trail. There were some people who were really excited about the possibility of seeing the next generation step off of the sidelines and not just sort of step up to the ballot, but actually get their name on the ballot. And in that category, I would put a lot of young people who don't typically recognize themselves or their values or their priorities in elected officials. And also, frankly, a lot of folks my grandparents' age who believed in JFK's long overdue promise of passing the torch to the next generation. But then the folks in the middle, I think, were deeply skeptical about electing somebody who was sometimes, their kids' age or maybe a little bit younger. I remember we did a focus group of middle-aged men who weren't necessarily all that excited about my candidacy, and we wanted to figure out how we could appeal to them. And, some of the feedback we got was like, well, he probably doesn't even own a worn-out shirt. Like, he doesn't have calluses. I barely knew how to tie my shoes when I was his age. So, yeah, there's definitely skepticism. But I've found that the best way to cut through that as a politician, as a candidate, as an elected official, is to spend more time listening than I do talking.
Wise advice for anyone.
Probably true, but especially in this business where people really want to feel heard by the folks who are supposed to be their voice in government.
So what are the upsides of being the youngest member of the General Assembly?
Well, I've learned a lot from my colleagues in the Capitol, right? Many have been there for longer than I've been alive, and they've got a really in-depth knowledge of how bills move through the building. They also walk into the building with a totally different set of experiences under their belt. Many of them know what it's like to start a small business or to send their kids to college or to try to buy a home in Connecticut. Admittedly, I don't have any of those experiences. But what I think I do bring to the table, whether we're sitting in the caucus room or whether we're in a committee hearing or whether we're on the Senate floor, is a perspective that's dramatically underrepresented, which is what it's like to try to afford a degree in the 21st century, what consent looks like on a college campus and what it doesn't, what it's like to participate in school shooter drills, so that when you hear a loud noise in the hallway, you're consumed by the fear of the next Parkland, the next Columbine arriving at your high school, at Staples High School, preventing you from really trying to learn what's on your desk. I come from a generation that sees climate change not as an academic problem, but as an existential threat to our ability to lead happy and healthy lives. So it's a totally different perspective than most of my colleagues walk into the building with. Both are really important. I learn a lot from them, and I think I contribute something by speaking up for the next generation's interests and concerns.
Do they ask for your opinion, or no? I'm serious. They spent their lives surrounded by people like them, and do they realize that you have a perspective to offer?
Some do, and some don't. I remember on the very first day when I was being sworn in, I had my whole family there. My girlfriend was there, and the Senate president, who's become a very close friend, he was elected in the early 1980s, a guy named Marty Looney, stood up and said, today I'm wearing a tie that's older than our newest state senator, Will Haskell. And it became kind of a running joke in the building. People would tell me, hey, I'm using a pen today that's older than you are. Or, rather disgustingly, one legislator said, I'm wearing underwear that's older than you are. I told her she had to throw it out. But the point being, some people, I think, joke around and maybe don't always go out and ask for my opinion on bills. But other legislators, people like Senator Looney, who have been in the building for a long time, recognize that sometimes the status quo stifles really good ideas, stifles innovative policy. And I've been really proud to work with people who are much, much older than I am, partnering on bills that we both care about. His district is very different than mine. He represents New Haven and Hamden, communities that are different than Westport and Wilton and Weston. But we both have a passion for fixing how this state funds or fails to fund special education in our public schools. So finding areas of common ground, that's been a really rewarding part of this job.
So to be specific,
Yeah.
can you think of an instance where somebody said, wow, I never thought of it from that point of view, or boy, you really opened my eyes to something?
Well, I'll point towards a bill that we haven't successfully passed yet, but we're about to try again in the 2022 session. When you go to rent an apartment in Connecticut, you have no idea how much the energy bills are going to be. You don't know how much it's going to cost to heat that apartment. And for many low-income folks, this regularly results in evictions because it's an unforeseen cost. The problem is, because it's a cost borne entirely by renters, landlords really don't have an incentive to invest in weatherization and insulation and other things that would bring down the cost of those bills. So there was a proposal in the 2021 session that said that landlords have to disclose the average cost of energy per month. They don't have to do anything other than disclose what energy is going to cost, but that has two benefits. One, it's going to give renters a little bit of a preview for what they can expect to pay so that they can make better financial plans and avoid eviction. But also, the added benefit of transparency is it's going to incentivize landlords to invest in weatherization, to invest in climate-friendly building practices. The reason I bring up this bill is we weren't able to pass it because I think that we don't have enough renters in the state legislature. More than 30% of Connecticut residents rent their home, and yet I'm the only renter in the whole Senate. I am the sole member of the Connecticut Senate Renters Caucus. I think that ought to change. I think that we need a democracy that's representative of all people who can afford to own homes and people who rent their apartments. And I've been speaking up quite a lot about this bill and why I want to bring it back for the next session. Because as a renter, it was a totally unforeseen cost for me, just how much my energy bill would be each month.
Wow. Great example. And sort of sticking with that idea of learning, did you go in with any preconceived notions about the political parties, and what have you learned by working with people from both parties?
Yeah, it's funny. I walked into the building rather pessimistic about the state of our politics. In fact, the reason I ran for office, one of the moments that made me sort of think twice about my plans after graduation and instead inspired me to come back to my hometown and to start knocking on doors, that light bulb moment, if you will, was President Obama's farewell address. And he said, if you're disappointed in your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself. I decided to do just that because I was really disappointed in my elected officials. I'm walking out of the building now with actually a lot of optimism about the state of our politics. We don't pay much attention to what happens on the state level. If you watch cable news, you think that Democrats and Republicans in Washington spend all day, all year fighting each other, and maybe that's true in D.C., but it's actually not true on the state level. Democrats and Republicans vote jointly on about 80% of bills at the state capitol. They're usually bipartisan. And that's not to say that they aren't important. They're critically important, so long as you care about the quality of the roads that you drive on, the quality of the schools that your kids go to, the cleanliness of the air that you breathe and the water that you drink. All of those decisions are made at the state level. So I guess my two takeaways, one is that I feel incredibly optimistic, and I want to share that optimism with people. I want people to start to recognize that there's really good, important, productive, nonpartisan or bipartisan work happening at the state capitol. And the second takeaway is maybe a little bit more negative, which is that work is flying under the radar, and we could be doing more and be doing better if citizens decided to direct all of the activism that they typically, send towards Washington, if they decided to redirect that energy towards the state level.
Why don't they? Do they just not realize it's important, or do they think Washington is bigger, or, why do you think people overlook what goes on in the State House?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I think it's multi-layered. One that you know well as somebody who's covered the Westport community for such a long time, we're losing our local news institutions. It's incredibly hard for me to communicate with my constituents about what's happening in Hartford. In fact, a funny story for you. I was knocking doors, I think it was Ridgefield, and I said something about the governor, blah, blah, blah. And the constituent at the door said, yeah, I like Cuomo, but I said, no. Our governor is Ned Lamont. Our capital is Hartford, not Albany. But who can blame him, right? If you turn on the local news, you're more likely to find out about what's happening in New York than you are about Connecticut. Fairfield County operates in a totally different media market. And on the micro level, I know as a student in the Westport Public Schools, I took a lot of field trips into New York City. The first time I had ever been to Hartford was when I decided to run for office. We don't visit the state capitol. So I think it's the lack of local news institutions. It's the lack of engagement in our schools with local and state level civics education. But these are things that can change quite easily. I'm always very open about inviting teachers in my district to bring their field trips up to the Capitol. I'll drop whatever I'm doing. When students come and visit, it's such a rarity for Fairfield County students to come to the Capitol. It makes my day, and I want to get them excited about state government.
So what is the perception of your fellow senators of Fairfield County? I mean, do they think the same thing, that we're not part of the state?
Yeah, Fairfield County, it struggles in terms of reputation. When I go to the Capitol and I talk about families in Fairfield County who struggle to put food on the table, there are some eye rolls from communities like the quiet corner of Connecticut, for example, that admittedly have a higher rate of poverty and lower household incomes. And that disparity is real. Nationwide, we're seeing the wealthy get wealthier and the poor get poorer, but nowhere is that disparity more stark, especially if you measure it by the Gini index or really any tool that economists put forward to measure inequality. Connecticut stands out as a leader in this trend. But it's not as though Fairfield County doesn't have tremendous need. It's just that it's obscured by the exorbitant wealth that we have. So yes, there are some incredibly wealthy constituents who I represent, but just a football field away from us is a homeless shelter that's usually filled with folks who can't afford housing in this exorbitantly expensive area. We've got a lot of work to do to correct the misconceptions about Fairfield County, and also to recognize that when we invest in Fairfield County, we're ultimately investing in an area that contributes a huge amount of tax revenue to the rest of the state.
Are you able to get that message across?
Well, I work on that a lot as the Senate chairman of the Transportation Committee. Our trains have gotten slower since 1970, not faster. I'm obsessed with this fact. I keep a 1970 Metro North timetable on my desk in the Senate, and I show anybody who will look at it that we're moving by every metric in the wrong direction. And I get some eye rolls that, Fairfield County commuters, they can deal with it. They're wealthy enough. They probably all own cars. But when you invest in economic development, when you invest in transportation infrastructure in Fairfield County so that people can get to and from their jobs faster, it means more revenue for the state of Connecticut, more folks moving out to Fairfield County, paying property taxes, paying state income taxes, contributing to programs that benefit every one of Connecticut's 169 municipalities. So it's not as though Fairfield County is a golden goose egg, but it is a community that we have to really invest in, and that we are going to see returns that benefit the entirety of the state.
You are not only a politician, you are an author. Your latest book, your first book, but your latest book is called 100,000 First Bosses, My Unlikely Path as a 22-Year-Old Lawmaker. And I think it's untraditional. I think a lot of books by politicians are stump speeches or sort of filled with rosy platitudes. And this one is pretty honest. You talk about the mistakes you've made, difficulty of finding affordable housing in your own district, what it's like learning the ropes of Hartford, being picked apart by a focus group. You want to talk about your book? Every author wants to talk about it.
I would love to. It's new to me because the book is just coming out this month. So I haven't had a chance to talk about it with folks very much, but I'm so excited to get it into the hands of readers because, like you said, I didn't want to write a very long stump speech. I think people are pretty tired of those books from politicians. I wanted to give a very honest look behind the scenes at what it actually means to run for office, what it means to be an elected official. And I share the mistakes I made along the way, hopeful that other candidates can learn from those mistakes and do more and do better. But I hope the primary takeaway from the book is people realizing, hey, this isn't that hard. I could do this, right? You don't need to be otherworldly brilliant in order to run for office. Aaron Sorkin's West Wing, I think, instilled in all of us that you have to, get a perfect score on the SATs and juggle multiple games of chess in order to be an elected official. But my experience in elected office at the state level is the government is filled with smart, competent, but rather ordinary people. I put myself in that category. There's nothing special about me other than the fact that I was really disappointed in my elected officials and felt as though I could contribute to the change that I wanted to see in government. And I think that if people decide to pick up this book and read it, they might recognize themselves in that. They might see themselves as somebody who's frustrated by the state of our politics, but unsure about how to channel that frustration. I hope this book prompts them to make that leap of faith and decide to run for office.
I got to ask this.
Yeah.
You talked about mistakes. What was the biggest mistake you made?
Oh my God, there are a bunch. Let me try to come up with just one. Well, I was so sheepish about my age when I first started running for office. I knocked on 4,000 doors in total in 2018. And the first 1,000 doors, I would knock on the door and say, "Hi, my name's Will Haskell." And immediately they would say, "How old are you?" I was 22. I look 12. And they were just... They didn't get why they thought it was a joke, frankly. And I would try to change the topic. I'd say, "Oh, I'm 22, but here's my plan to fix our pension system. Yeah, I'm 22 years old, but here's how I want to speed up our trains. Here's how I want to, clean up the Saugatuck River and improve the Long Island Sound." I would try to pivot and talk about policy. But that wasn't all that effective. People tuned out. They still didn't sort of believe that it was possible for a 22-year-old to be a state senator. Something changed after the first 1,000 doors where I decided, okay, I'm going to embrace my age. I'm going to talk about it as an asset and not a liability. And it made all the difference in our campaign. I said, yeah, I'm 22 years old, but that's exactly why I'm running. The next generation, the stakeholders in the future, Connecticut's taxpayers of tomorrow, they don't have any voice in the decisions that Hartford makes every day. They don't have a seat at the table where important public policies are written, policies that impact our future. And when I started to talk about my age as something that I was proud of, a reason that I should be elected, well, then all of a sudden our campaign office was filled with 15, 16, 17-year-old interns. We had a volunteer who had once voted for FDR coming into the office every week to make calls. So it made all the difference in our campaign, and it's something I hope other young candidates learn from so that they don't make that mistake. When you're running as a young person, talk about your youth. Talk about why that means your voice is needed.
So the book is really a call to action to get other people involved.
It is. It's not a how-to guide to run for office because I don't really believe in those books, right? Every candidate is different. Every district is unique. I'm not qualified to write a how-to guide to run for office. I've only run in these 7 towns. And it's a collection of funny stories. It's a collection of things that I've learned. But first and foremost, as you said, it's a call to action for other unlikely candidates to recognize that if they don't recognize themselves in government officials, that doesn't mean that they should step back from politics. It's exactly the reason that they should try to get their name on the ballot, because we really need their voice in government right now.
We're talking about politics, and you've used the word politician. Is that a pejorative term? Do you call yourself a politician? Are you proud to be a politician?
Yeah, I don't think it should be a pejorative term. I remember on my very first day, actually it was before my first day, we went up, there were 6 or 7 newly elected Democratic state senators, and it was my first job out of college, and we had this freshman orientation that to me felt a lot like college orientation. You got your ID badges, you learned where the bathroom was, you learned, where your office was. It was a totally bizarre experience, but we had a lot of conversations with folks in the building as sort of to get acclimated to our new jobs, our new roles. And it was Senator Beth Bayh, who's now the Commissioner of Early Childhood Education, who said, don't allow politician to become an insult, because you all have stepped up. You make, $29,000 a year. You're going to work your butts off every day for your community. And whether you call it politics or whether you call it public service, you're doing something that ultimately is aimed at making other people's lives better. And it's a shame that we've let cable news or cocktail party conversation term a politician as a bad thing, when in fact it's just people trying to make their community a little bit better for the next generation.
You mentioned the salary. Do you think that that very low salary is a deterrent so that only people who, have the means to run can run?
It's a huge deterrent for young people. It's a huge deterrent for women. It's a huge deterrent for people of color and low-income individuals. I love my colleagues. I've learned a lot from them, but let's be honest about the fact that older, retired men who have been very successful in their careers are overrepresented in government. A lot of my colleagues have retired from a lucrative career in the private sector and are now making a turn towards public service. They bring a valuable perspective, but that shouldn't be the only perspective that we hear in government. Another similar problem, Dan, is in Connecticut, when we pay elected officials such a low salary, most of us, or many of us, I should say, have to look for jobs outside of government. That creates either a conflict of interest or as detrimentally an appearance of a conflict of interest. So there are legislators who work for unions. There are legislators who work for Eversource. And when these entities come before the legislature, it can create some awkward situations. This is a problem in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Let me be clear. It's not a popular thing to advocate for pay increases. People think that politicians are sitting pretty on piles of money. But the fact of the matter is, I have a lot of trouble affording rent here in Fairfield County, here in Westport. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily the reason that pay should increase, but I do think that if we start to pay politicians a sizable wage, not something where they're going to get rich, but something where they can afford to pay their rent, put food on the table, send their kids to school, then we're going to start to see more unlikely candidates, a more representative population walking in the halls of the halls of the Capitol.
So after all this talk about how great it is for public service and how much you've enjoyed and loved it and learned, you're not going to run for a third term.
That's right. I recently announced that I'm going to finally go to law school and take a step back from politics.
Tough call?
Really tough call. One that I talk about in the final section of the book. But here's the thing. Two things I want to say. One is I ran for office against somebody who had been serving at the Capitol for 22 years, as long as I'd been alive. And I ran because I thought it was time for a change. I think that government works best when new voices and different perspectives get to shake up the status quo. And I still think that that's true. So I've had an awesome 4 years. I can't imagine feeling better about the things we've been able to accomplish. And now I think it's probably time for a change once again. I think that Connecticut will benefit from a new voice in the 26th district. The other thing that I want to say is I want to be realistic when I tell people to run for office. So often when I read books by politicians, they say, get involved in politics, it'll change your life and you'll become a lifelong elected official. Maybe some people want that, but surely not everybody does. Instead, what my book says is the problems we're facing, from gun violence prevention to economic inequality to climate change, they're really urgent, and we need people to roll up their sleeves and get involved right now. But if you want to go back to having a normal life after that, personally, I think that's okay. That's at least what I want. I've been able to contribute for 4 years to this state that I love, and now I'm ready to live a little bit closer to the person that I love, to move to New York City, to pursue a degree that I've been wanting to get for some time. And maybe one day I'll jump back into politics in the future. But I think it's okay to have people go into politics and then not spend their whole lives in elected office.
So you mentioned the state and learning about it. What have you learned in your 4 years about Connecticut, about the district, the 26th district, and about yourself?
Okay. Let me start with Connecticut and the 26th district. People are too often pessimistic about our state. Just growing up here, I know that a lot of people they can't wait to leave when they graduate high school, whether it's going to college in another state or getting their first job in another state. They move to Connecticut for the great schools, and then they sort of forget all of the other things, all of the other reasons that we call this place home. Whether it's the exceptional natural resources like the Long Island Sound, whether it's the high quality of our public school system, whether it's the first-rate higher education institutions, from Yale to Wesleyan to UConn to Norwalk Community College. There's a lot to be proud of in Connecticut, and we as a state, we are lacking state pride, and I think we ought to change that. I'm so happy to have had the chance to grow up in Connecticut. I want more people to feel that sort of that pride in the place that we call home. What have I learned about myself? I get my energy from other people. The greatest thing about this job is that it involves a lot of events, and sometimes that can be tiring, right? The district is so large that driving from my apartment in Westport to an Eagle Scout ceremony in Bethel can be, pretty exhausting at the end of the day. But I have to say, all of the greatest ideas for legislation, they've come from constituents. They come from a Wilton High School student who reaches out and says, our mental health system is all messed up, and I don't have access to confidential care. I'm not comfortable telling my parents that I'm seeing a therapist. My therapist thinks that I should continue to receive confidential care, and yet our laws are so screwed up in Connecticut that I have to either stop pursuing mental health care or disclose to my parents the fact that I'm struggling with anxiety or depression. Thanks to his advocacy, thanks to an email or a text message that he wrote me, we were able to change the law together, working in the Senate to pass Senate Bill 2 last year, which amended that statute. So that's just one example of the fact that I get all my energy and all my ideas from other people, and whether I'm in politics or not, I know I want to continue serving in a capacity that allows me to spend most of my time around others.
Great. Fascinating. I've learned a ton. So is there anything I should have asked you, like, I don't know, any plans to get married?
Yes, I do plan to get married to my physics lab partner from Staples High School. Her name is Katie. We've been dating now for 8 years, and I'm so excited. I just proposed shortly before Christmas. Congratulations. Thank you so much. And no date yet? No, we, like everybody else in the world, we want to know when the pandemic's going to end. The worst thing in the world would be to host a super spreader and, risk killing our grandparents and that sort of thing. So we're gonna wait a little bit until the pandemic subsides. Well, congratulations, Will, on the upcoming marriage, on law school, on 2 very successful terms as our state senator, and on all that you are going to accomplish moving forward. So thank you for being here for 06880, the podcast, and good luck with all that's ahead. Thank you so much, Dan. You bet.